Have you ever wondered why we can reach points of questioning or even depression despite having a nearly perfect world? I ask this question a lot, and when I'm discussing this with friends and so forth, I often quote a line, roughly paraphrased, from an old movie called Excalibur. And in this movie, Merlin is with King Arthur, and he is on the top of a mountain, and they have just conquered all of these various tribes and kingdoms, and they're going to formulate it into one governing entity, the empire of King Arthur. And they're happy, and the King Arthur and his knights are rejoicing on this mountaintop. And Merlin, the wizened character that he is, takes pause, and Arthur looks at him and says, "What is with you?" And Merlin says, and again, I'm going to butcher this, but he says roughly, "Rejoice, be happy, celebrate. This is important. But more important is this: remember. Remember this moment, remember this time, because it is the curse of man that he forgets." And I've always remembered this in moments when I've felt down, a little bit depressed, wondering after all these years in my world what I've accomplished, what I've done. And this can lead to depression. And so what I decided to do, and I realized quite some time ago, was that having spent decades, many decades, I'm going to age myself here, as a film and television creator, producer, director, and fine art photographer, that I have unique experiences, and in some cases, very unique experiences that a lot of people don't have or won't have. And so I think I'm blessed in a certain way that I have had these experiences, but I don't really ever talk about them. I don't really share them that often because I forget. Yes, I forget. The other day I was going through my library, my archives, because I'm going to start putting out little mini documentaries on some of these completely off the scale, insane adventures that I've created, and some that were created for me. And what I realized in going through this archive is that the amount of work, the amount of television shows, film projects, fine art, photography, expeditions that I've done over the decades, and we are talking many decades, is pretty extraordinary. And I don't mean this in a self-serving way. I mean this in a very real, tangible way that describes a lifetime. And yet, despite this remarkable experiences, I too have moments where I feel down. Comes with age, no doubt. But I've often wondered how folks who haven't had these kinds of experiences and these adventures as they get older cope with it all. Because I could see if you've worked in a cubicle your entire life, 9 to 5, and you basically get weekends and maybe a couple of weeks a year to decompress a little bit, that once you get older, you can probably quite easily look back with some fairly serious regrets and doubts about yourself and your life. And what I've come to realize is that I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget. And I'm fortunate in that, being a filmmaker, a film producer and director and cinematographer, that I have this catalog of images, video, movies, TV shows, etc., to remind me, because they're still out there. Very vibrant, just as vibrant today as they've ever been. And so when I was running through my mind, the breadth of the work, the depth, the scale, it occurred to me that because I immerse myself in what I do so much, and that's what's important, the projects are important. It's not an ego thing with me. I don't like to be in the spotlight. I don't want to be in the spotlight. I know what that means. I've been there. I did my time in Hollywood. I know what that means. No, thank you. But I don't want to forget. And when I looked back, I realized I've created, produced, and directed hundreds of music videos and commercials. And then after that, literally hundreds of television shows for platforms such as HBO/Cinemax. Hundreds of independent movies. I even have hundreds of full-length feature films that I did for a series called The Torchlights that don't have my name on them. I used an alias. And since then, we continue to produce even more independent movies, horror films, science fiction, thrillers. And of course, I've done a lot, produced and directed a lot of adult-based movies, hundreds of those, parodies and so forth. And the work speaks for itself. So how is it, knowing this, that I could ever become depressed or down? How could I ever question? And I'm sure you may feel the same way, and maybe you've looked in the mirror at some point and asked the same question, which is, what am I doing? What the hell, man? What have I done with my life? Right? Well, as I've done this, what I've noticed is that I'm wrong. I have a magnificent body of work with stories that I will begin to tell. And this is the first. This is the first of my attempts to start to tell some of those stories. Not because I feel like I need to be on a platform or serve some sort of mega ego. That's not it. I prefer solitude. I prefer wilderness. I prefer being with my wife, my magnificent wife, on the land, hiking, trekking, exploring, alone. Trust me. And you'll learn more. A lot of you already know this, but you'll learn more. And so it's not for that, but it is for this. Because I recognize that in this day and age, as things have become remarkably chaotic, and we'll get into that in some future talks, that we need some morsels of inspiration. We need more beauty. We need more people to share that which is glorious in this living experience in this time, because it's all too easy with our doom scrolling and all of the propaganda and information that we're being absolutely blasted with, pulverized with every single day, that which is important is quite often almost invisible, lost. But it doesn't have to be. This doesn't have to be a doom and gloom scenario. And I think through sharing some of the experiences that we have had, some unbelievably outrageous, some downright death-defying and dangerous, and some just plain wonderful, that perhaps it'll allow you and others to just grasp a few tiny morsels of motivation, drive, and the desire to continue. The desire to continue. And I would be willing to bet that if you look back at your existence, your internal archive of images of your life, what you will find is that, wow, especially for those of you who are older, wow, What a trip, right? Am I right? We dwell on the darkness. We dwell on the suffering. We dwell on that which we thought harmed us. But I don't think that's the case at all, because I think we need drama. I'll share a lot about this in some future talks too, because I definitely have some experience with this. But if we don't have drama, if we don't have difficult challenges, if we don't have adventures of some kind, wherever you are, I don't care if you're living in an urban environment or living in a homestead in the middle of nowhere, there is still adventure out there, plenty of it. And now, in these times, the times that the Hopi, the great, beautiful Hopi people might call the Puakwachi, or the time of the Puaka, the sorcerer, which has spun a kind of a web which creates an illusion around everything that we think is real, but is not. I think that once we realize this and see this, that there is adventure, that there is a remarkable opportunity now, especially now, to seek beauty. It seems to be evaporating all around us. Understood. But this isn't the first time this cycle has happened. Ask some of the ancient peoples, some of the ones who actually remember. I've been among the Hatalis and the medicine people and the spirit people quite a bit. I'm not going woo-woo on you here, because I'm a kind of a hybrid. I'm very, very pragmatic, very scientifically oriented, and I have spent a lot of time with some people who have remembered the sacred ways and the old ways, the ancient ways. And I've really embedded this in a lot of my work, and that's for another story. But the important thing here is to remember what you've gone through, to embrace it, good or bad, especially the bad. Embrace it. Look it in the eye, feel it, see, hear, create the sensation of how that felt. Because when you do that, and only when you do that, can you find a kind of wisdom. And I don't claim to be a wise man sitting here. However, I do claim to have some fairly remarkable experiences that are in fact unusual and very different. I have spent thousands, literally thousands of days in solitude where I haven't seen another human being, in deep wilderness, seeking, searching, photographing, filming. So many. And I am so happy I have these images to share, because otherwise they would be lost, certainly to my memory, and lost to the world. Perhaps they would be vibrating out there in the universe in some weird way, and there would be a necessity for some sort of bizarre decoder to decode these things and bring them back to life. But I don't want to count on that. I would rather share. And if it helps one person see things a little bit differently, or maybe breathes life into the spirit and motivation and desire and compassion of someone, then it's worth it. Then it's definitely worth it. But for me to just let these things vanish into the ether, that would be a sin, wouldn't it? In fact, I think that might even be the definition, the true definition of sin. It's not what we think. The word sin is not what we think. So, I will be uploading these recordings, these thoughts, these ruminations, these expressions and stories that I've gone through in my wild life. And I hope you enjoy. And I don't look at comments and things that often. I'll try to. If there are any trolls or whatnot that show up, everybody else, just boot them out of there. I know some of you are just going to laugh and whatever. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, you matter. And those who absorb good thoughts from people who have experiences and put them to good use. That's valuable and that's important. So, with that said, my fine art photography site is oronaart.com. Tabitha and I, our current, most recent independent movies are at psychoactivecircus.com. There's some free AVOD, Tubi movies on there, things like that. There's some pay-per-views, things like that. If you want the more explicit, more adult-oriented, that's definitely the pay-per-view stuff. So that's more like the Vimeo titles. So go check those out if you're interested in seeing a tiny bit of what these things can be like. We're shooting new experimental films now, and some very remarkable and somewhat haunting things are beginning to happen while we film these movies. They're very experimental, liminal spaces style, sci-fi, thrillers, horror. And we're allowing the movies to speak for themselves after so long and so much experience shooting so many different projects over the years. I'm letting the movies speak for themselves. They're just coming from within. They're like the concept, the Zen concept of the arrow shoots itself. And once you've mastered something after, well, in my case, 37, 38 years of true professional work, what happens is the arrow begins to shoot itself. In other words, if I were an archer, I wouldn't even feel myself pulling the string back, and I wouldn't even feel myself releasing. It just happens. That is, the arrow shoots itself. And that is such a wonderful thing. And I'm learning now how to allow the movies that we create to be that, to be the arrow shoots itself. And what's been happening in the last few projects has been pretty bizarre and frankly pretty freaky. Oblivion Cult is my newest. That's at psychoactivecircus.com. And that began as something entirely different than what it became. I will share that, and I think that some of you might gather some inspiration from that one. At least maybe a little illumination in some ways from that one. So, don't forget. Don't forget your world. Don't forget your life. Remember. If you remember these things, any depression you may have, any form of mental questioning that you may have will evaporate. Remember. See the events of your life and embrace them. And do not allow outside noise, outside distortion, deviations to occur, distractions. They're everywhere now. And as I said before, the Puaka, the sorcerers of the Hopis, this is their game. They know exactly what they're doing, but you don't have to. You can find beauty and love and wonderful things now, but you have to remember, don't forget. Don't forget who and what you are. Remember, it's so critical. When I looked at that list of archival images and videos and things, it was like a different lifetime. And it really, really made me wake up. And so I'm going to share, whether you like it or not. See you next time.